You're listening to the Learn Spanish con Salsa podcast. Just a quick heads up before we get started with this episode, I wanted to let you know about a free resource for listeners of the Learn Spanish con Salsa podcast. That means you. If you are planning your next trip abroad, or if you're just getting back out into the world again, maybe you're going to an event or to a festival or to a meetup, that you need to be prepared for what to say when you meet someone for the first time. Download our free Spanish conversation guide so that you'll be prepared to have a conversation with anyone that you meet for the first time in Spanish. We give you a list of the most common questions that you'll be asked and that you may want to ask someone when you meet them for the first time, along with the responses so that you can be prepared when you have that conversation in less than 30 minutes. So to get your free conversation guide, just go to SpanishConversationGuide.com. Simple, right? SpanishConversationGuide.com to download your quick guide to prep for your first Spanish conversation.
Bienvenidos. Welcome to the Learn Spanish con Salsa podcast,
the show for Spanish learners
that love music,
travel, and culture.
Close your grammar textbooks,
shut down the language apps, and open your ears
to how Spanish is spoken in the real world.
Let us show you
how to go from beginner
to bilingual.
Here is your host,
certified language coach,
Tamara Marie.
Hola, bienvenidos al episodio 228. Welcome to episode 228 of the Learn Spanish con Salsa podcast. In this episode, I'm going to be answering a question that I got in an email from a listener. And it was about the verbs traer and llevar and what is the difference between the two. So this person was having a little bit of confusion about when to use each verb. So I thought it'd be a great topic for an episode. So if you have a question that you like answered on the podcast, make sure that you also write into us, host@learnspanishconsalsa.com. If you want to reach me directly, you can also send us a message on Instagram @learnspanishconsalsa. And we also have our Facebook group. So if you go to learnspanishconsalsa.com/Facebook, you'll be able to ask questions in our community as well. But I thought this was a great question because the verbs traer and llevar can be a little bit confusing because they have very, very similar meanings, and they're also used in different expressions. So I'm going to break down the uses of traer and llevar in this episode, and then I will explain some of the regional differences that may be the source of some of the confusion around how to use each verb. And at the end, I'm going to explain to you a simple rule of thumb that you can use so that you're not confused about how to use it in your day-to-day conversations. So as always, you can go to our show notes page, learnspanishconsalsa.com/228 for more information about the examples presented in this episode. So first of all, in our last episode, we did break down the lyrics of the song Llévame Contigo by Romeo Santos. So you should already have a little bit of familiarity with the verb llevar. But I'm going to start out talking about traer, what it means, how it's used, and then some common expressions. And then we'll talk about the verb llevar and some of those differences. So first, the verb traer in Spanish means to bring. And generally when you're using traer, you're talking about something that's coming to you or towards you or whoever is the person speaking. So again, it's usually used in that context, but there are a few exceptions. But the easiest way, the shorthand, is to think of it as to bring. So, for example, you could say, if you have a friend that's coming over and you want them to bring something with them, you want them to bring a dessert, for example, you can ask the question, ¿Puedes traer el postre? ¿Puedes traer el postre? So, can you bring the dessert? Right? That means it's coming directly to you, the location where you are. So the person is bringing something to you. You could also say, ¿Puedes traerme un café cuando vengas? ¿Puedes traerme un café cuando vengas? So can you bring me a coffee when you come? Right? So again, these are things where you're making a request to bring you something. Traer can also be used in some different ways. So not just to literally bring a physical object, but can also be used to talk about something that causes something else. So for example, I could say, ese plan nos puede traer muchos dolores de cabeza. Ese plan nos puede traer muchos dolores de cabeza. So that plan could bring us a lot of headaches. So again, traer nos puede traer, it could bring us muchos dolores de cabeza. So dolores de cabeza is how you say headaches. So again, it's not necessarily talking about it's bringing us something physically, even though a headache is a physical thing you can feel, but it's saying what it will bring, what it's going to cause in the future. And it can also be used to talk about something that brings you a sort of emotional or physical, or not physical, but like an emotional sensation or something that's memorable to you. So for example, I could say, esta canción me trae recuerdos de mi infancia. Esta canción me trae recuerdos de mi infancia. So this song brings me or brings back memories of my childhood. All right. So again, it's traer, it's bringing something to me. And you also notice that generally there's going to be another subject pronoun, right? It's like you can't just say to bring. Like, okay, to bring what into whom, right? So you can't just say, oh, traer. It's like, okay, what are we bringing and who is it being brought to? So you generally are going to have like traer me, or in the example before, nos puede traer. So really, where are things being brought to? That has to be pointed out. There's also some expressions that use traer. So for example, traer cola. And that is used when you have like something that just won't go away, like something that's haunting you or something that has like these consequences that linger, that just stick around. Also, for example, I could say, ese comentario trae cola. Ese comentario trae cola. So that remark or that comment is going to haunt us, right? So it's going to have these consequences that we might not see in the immediate moment. Another expression with traer is traer algo entre manos. Traer algo entre manos. And that's like to be up to something or to have a hidden plan. So if you think entre manos, sort of like between your hands, I almost think about like villain that's like rubbing his hands together like, ooh, I'm up to something, right? He's planning something. So for example, I could say, están muy callados. Seguro traen algo entre manos. Están muy callados. Seguro traen algo entre manos. So they're awfully quiet. I'm sure they're up to something, or I'm sure they're plotting, right? So again, it kind of reminds me as a parent, like when you hear quiet, it's like, ooh, oh, they're being really well behaved. No, they're probably up to something. So es traer algo entre manos. There's also traer de cabeza. Traer de cabeza. And this is really like targeted like at someone, right? So traer de cabeza means like to drive someone crazy or to keep them kind of obsessed with or preoccupied with something. So for example, la planificación de las vacaciones me trae de cabeza. La planificación de las vacaciones me trae de cabeza. So planning this vacation, right? The vacation plans are stressing me out. They're driving me crazy. Me trae de cabeza. There's another expression using traer that you might hear in the Caribbean. As you know, El Caribe is one of my mis lugares favoritos, one of my favorite places. But you might hear something like trae lo tuyo. Trae lo tuyo. This is similar. It's like in English how you would say BYOB, right? It's like bring your own share. You've got to contribute something to the pot. Like you can't just like come and be a freeloader. So for example, if I say trae lo tuyo para el asado y yo pongo la música. Trae lo tuyo para el asado y yo pongo la música. So bring your own stuff to the cookout and I'll take care of the music. So it's almost a way of like dividing up like who's bringing what. So trae lo tuyo. It's like bring your own. So those are some phrases that use the verb traer. And again, it's really helpful to just think of traer as to bring. Okay, so now let's talk about llevar. And you might start to notice why it might be a little bit confusing as we go through some examples. But the easy way to think of llevar is to take, right? So when you're thinking of llevar, it's really something is going away from you. So it's not coming to you here, it's going away from you or from the person who's speaking. So it's really literally like to take it away, to take it from where I am to another place. So For example, I could say, let's say I'm at my house getting ready to leave for a party, and I'm the one that's going to bring the dessert, right, to the party, right? I would say, voy a llevar el postre. Voy a llevar el postre. So I'm going to take the dessert, right, to the party. So the person before asked me, ¿puedes traer el postre? And I can say, sí, yo voy a llevarlo. Or sí, voy a llevar el postre. So that's kind of how that works. To bring, to take. I could also say, voy a llevar estos documentos a la reunión. Voy a llevar estos documentos a la reunión. So I'm going to take these documents to the meeting. So again, this is like something I'm taking with me to another place. So that's the easiest way to kind of remember the meaning of llevar. If I wanted to give someone a command and tell them to take something, I can say, llévatelo, llévatelo. So like, take it with you, right? Llévatelo a tu casa. Take it to your house with you. Like, you take it home with you. And that could be what I would probably say if someone did bring dessert and they wanted to leave an entire cake. I'm like, I'm not eating that whole cake. Llévatelo contigo. Take it with you. I don't want to have that whole cake in my house. So if you bring postre to my house, you will be taking it with you. All right. So llevar can also be used. One of the most common uses, and this is actually one of the most useful phrases for llevar that I found, is like if you're at a restaurant and you want to take something to go, you would say para llevar, para llevar. So this is to go. This is like to take with me. So para llevar, por favor. It's like to go, please. That's like how you would order if you don't want to eat something there, or if you're just going up to someone and ordering takeout. You say, para llevar. So they understand to pack it up for you and not to bring it to the table. All right. Llevar is also very, very commonly used, not to mean to take, but to talk about like what you're wearing. And I wouldn't try to, again, translate that because it's really weird to try to think about I'm taking these clothes on my body. Like, it doesn't make any sense. So it's used to talk about both clothing and accessories. So for example, I could say, siempre lleva un abrigo rojo en invierno. Siempre lleva un abrigo rojo en invierno. So she always wears a red coat in the winter. I could also say, normalmente lleva un vestido negro y pendientes de oro cuando sale los fines de semana. Normalmente lleva un vestido negro y pendientes de oro cuando sale los fines de semana. So she usually wears a black dress and gold earrings when she goes out on the weekends. So again, I can wear earrings, I can wear a watch, llevar un reloj, llevar pendientes, like, so any accessories, anything you put on your body, you would use llevar. Another meaning of llevar is like to lead. So this is similar to like when we talked about traer, and it can be used to discuss the cause of something. This llevar is like used to say leading something to a cause, right? Like I'm taking this somewhere, leading to an outcome, right? So it's kind of, again, the flip side of traer. So for example, I could say, esto nos va a llevar a mejorar el proceso. Esto nos va a llevar a mejorar el proceso. So this will lead us to improve the process. So again, this is like going to carry us to a future state, right? And not just literally take us somewhere. Another very, very common use of llevar, especially if you are a Spanish learner, I'm sure you've been asked this question, but it can also be used to talk about the duration of something. So this is a very specific use of llevar. So I could say, llevo 2 años aprendiendo español. Llevo 2 años aprendiendo español. So I've been learning Spanish for 2 years. Now, literally, if I try to translate that, I'm saying I am carrying 2 years Spanish, which doesn't make any sense, right? So again, this is just used to talk about duration. So if I say, llevo 2 años, I have been doing this thing for 2 years. Llevo un mes sin salir de mi casa, right? So I haven't left the house for a month. Okay, so this is, again, just to talk about duration. So just think of it that way. Don't try to translate it word for word, but it's a very, very common use of llevar, and probably something you've had to say if someone's asked you about how long you've been learning Spanish. Llevo 2 años, llevo un mes, llevo 10 años, cualquier cosa, whatever it is. There's also several expressions that use the verb llevar. And again, these are not things that you want to translate literally. I will give you a few examples here, and then we'll talk about some of the regional differences, because there are cases in which llevar can be used a little bit differently, which is, I think, may have caused the listener who wrote in their original confusion. So we have llevar la contraria. Llevar la contraria. And this is like, in English, we would say like to play the devil's advocate, right? So you're like purposefully contradicting someone. So I can say, siempre me llevas la contraria en las reuniones. It's like you always contradict me in meetings. Like you're always playing the devil's advocate, right? Llevar la delantera. Llevar la delantera. And this is like to be ahead of. So I could say, nuestro equipo lleva la delantera por 2 goles. So our team is 2 goals ahead. So like, again, for like at a soccer game, un partido de fútbol, like you could say lleva la delantera. In this case, it's actually saying exactly by how much they're ahead, por 2 goles. So again, another phrase that you can use using llevar that's not literal. And then we have this one again, very, very common, llevarse bien o llevarse mal. And this is actually, this is a form of the verb llevar where we're talking about actions that are not necessarily done between people, but it is talking about how you get along with someone else. So you can't really llevarse by yourself, right? That'd be really weird. I get along with myself, like, but usually it's used to talk about how you get along with others. So llevarse bien is you get along well. Llevarse mal is like, we don't really get along that well. So I can say, nos llevamos muy bien con los vecinos. Nos llevamos muy bien con los vecinos. So we get along really well with our neighbors, right? So again, this nos llevamos, it's a way of saying like we get along, and it's usually used in that context. But you wouldn't usually use this in first person, because again, it would sound weird. But then again, very, very common, llevarse bien o llevarse mal. So now let's talk about some regional differences between traer and llevar, because again, I think this is where some of that confusion might come up, because in different countries, as you know in Spanish, every country has its own way of saying things, its own expressions, and there are some things that are used a little bit differently depending on where you are in the Spanish-speaking world. So I want to talk a little bit about that. So in some places, like particularly in Spain or in Argentina, you'll notice that people tend to use llevar in situations where you'd expect to hear traer. And they're doing this because they're focusing more on like the action of like carrying or transporting something with them, instead of like the strict, like, you know, I'm bringing it or I'm taking it. So in other words, let's say you have a friend from Spain and they're on your way to your house. Instead of saying, yo voy a traer el postre, they might say, llevo el postre. You know, when they're asking like, should I bring the dessert? And they're really thinking about taking it along with them from their house. So that's why you might hear it said that way. But it basically means the same thing. It's also really common in Argentina. You might hear someone say, mañana te llevo el dinero, which is like, tomorrow I'll bring you the money. I'll bring you the money tomorrow. But it's like te llevo. It's like they're carrying it. Really, they're not saying they're bringing it to you. They're saying I'm carrying it to you. So again, just like a little bit of regional difference in Spain and Argentina, you might hear llevar where you're expecting to hear traer. But I wouldn't get too confused by that because the context is really important. And if someone is asking about bringing something and they say llevar instead of traer, hopefully you'll still be able to understand based on the context. Now, there is another use of traer that you usually will hear in like Mexico or Central America. And it really just means like to have something on you or to be carrying it or have it with you. So you might think, oh, that's when I would use llevar, but it's more common to use traer. So for example, I could ask you, ¿traes efectivo? ¿Traes efectivo? So it's like, do you have cash on you? Like, did you bring cash? And I can say it because, el café no acepta tarjetas. So like the cafe doesn't accept credit cards. So you have to have cash, right? So traes efectivo is like, what do you have on you? Or I could say traes ID, like, do you have your ID on you? Like things that you are expected to have kind of on your person. So that is pretty common. You'll also probably hear that in the southwestern part of the U.S. as well, because it's sort of closer to Mexico. And you also might hear traer used instead of llevar when talking about clothing and accessories in Mexico. So that, again, is where it might be confusing. If you hear this, you might go, I thought I was supposed to say llevar if I was talking about what I'm wearing. So in Mexico, you might hear something like, el bebé trae un sombrerito muy lindo. El bebé trae un sombrerito muy lindo. So the baby's wearing a cute little hat, right? You're like, oh, trae un sombrerito. Why not lleva? Again, this is just sort of a regional difference. So that is a little bit different. Also in Caribbean Spanish, they do sometimes tend to blur that line as well, especially if everyone ends up going together. So if there's like a group coming together, this traer and llevar, it's not like a very fine line because everyone's kind of going to end up at the same place. So whether I'm bringing it or I'm taking it or it's coming with me, it's kind of like all the same. So you might hear trae comida a la playa or lleva comida a la playa. Like I'm bringing it or I'm taking it. Like, look, we're all going to the beach, so it doesn't really matter. So again, try not to get too caught up in those differences. Know that you might hear them interchange. But from your perspective, like when you're speaking Spanish, so long as you stick with traer means to bring and llevar means to take, you will definitely be understood. And again, that is more of the proper way to use those words. So I wouldn't be too worried about it. Like I said, you might hear some of those regional differences in Argentina or Spain, Central South America, Mexico, Caribbean. That's always the case with Spanish. But for your purposes as a learner, if you just stick to use traer when you're talking about what you're bringing and llevar when you're talking about taking something, it'll be pretty simple. And again, if you're talking about bringing something to a gathering, there really is no wrong answer. You're going to bring it, you're going to take it, you're all going to end up together eating or having fun. So the last thing you want to do is be stressed out by which verb that you're using in that case, okay? So again, I hope this was helpful for you, this review of traer versus llevar. I hope you noticed that llevar actually has a lot more phrases that it's used in that are very, very common than traer. And in that case, you really can't mix those up because, again, you don't want to think of it as just that one verb. You want to think of it as the entire phrase. So take some time if you need to listen to this episode again, note some of these down. If you want to write some example sentences using your own examples of things that you might actually say in conversation, that might be helpful to kind of commit these to memory. But again, just stick to that basic rule. Traer is to bring, llevar is to take, and hopefully it'll cut out some of that confusion. So once again, if you want to see some of these examples, you can go to our show notes page, learnspanishconsalsa.com/228 for episode 228 of the podcast. And as always, I hope something that you heard in this episode will take you one step closer from Spanish beginner to bilingual. Hasta la próxima.
Thank you for listening to the Learn Spanish con Salsa podcast at learnspanishconsalsa.com.